And he was like, yeah, Dina, Snooki said that George Washington Carver stayed there at the house. And I was like, Dad, don't be telling people that. Like, what are you talking about? Well, she said that, Duke Ellington's band stayed at his house. And I was like, Dad, well, they did.
Right. And it's in the records.
They actually did.
Welcome to Being the Change, the official podcast of James Madison University, brought to you by Madison Magazine. Each episode brings to you stories of how members of the JMU community combine intellect with action to live lives of purpose and meaning. That's Being the Change.
What's up, JMU? Andy Perrine here. Welcome to Being the Change, the university's podcast. This is a really special episode today where we're going to talk about an amazing project that has brought together JMU, EMU, and the local community, including the community's mayor. Mayor Dina Reed joins us this morning. Welcome, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So great to have you. And also Carol Nash, who's is in the ISAT college, and she's an archaeologist and a historic preservationist, and has done a ton of work interpreting local history, including indigenous peoples. So welcome to you, Carol.
Thank you. Very good to be here.
Well, now this project is this has been known for a while in the community that a house exists on Mason Street. It's been known in the Black community mainly that this house was a Green Book house. And for those of you who may not know what a Green Book house is, there was a movie in 2018 that came out depicting Don Shirley, who was an amazing pianist who lived in New York at the time and was going to go on a tour of the Southeast and the West. And he had to hire a bodyguard to take care of him in the Jim Crow South. And the narrative device of the movie was that they followed the pathway laid out by the Green Book, which was a book designed for Black folks back in the day to be able to find a safe place to stay the night. So, Mayor Reed, why don't you give us a little bit of background on the significance of the Green Book to the Black community, and then we'll get over into the importance of preserving this Green Book house.
Right. Yeah. So you're exactly right. There was a time in our history, during the Jim Crow era, where Black people couldn't stay in hotels or go to the same restaurants as white people. And so they had this book, right, this Green Book that listed businesses and places for them to go to stay safely. And so we are fortunate to have one of the few Green Book properties that are still intact, because a lot of them over the course of the years were demolished. And so here in Harrisonburg, we have this sweet jewel of a home that was used during that era for Black people to come and stay safely. And it was owned by Ida Mae Francis, and it still sits on Mason Street, and we have this jewel of a home here in our city.
And for those of you who know downtown, it's on Mason Street, directly across from the Friendly City Food Co-op, and it's beautifully preserved, almost remarkably so. It's almost hermetically preserved. It's almost as if it's still in its state from the early '60s, which makes it a wonderful historical find. Now, how did you become aware and associated with the Francis House?
Yeah, it's a story of kindness. My father, William Reed, is a neighbor of the Rousers, and the Rouser family. It was a brother and sister, Henry and Lois, and we called them. Henry was called Bubbles, Bubs, and Lois was called Snooki. And so they lived. That was their family home, and they lived there their entire life. And so my father used to walk around the neighborhood, and they would be outside. They never married, never had children. It was a brother and sister. They lived there in the house.
Right.
And so my father would take walks, and
Your
he would
father's
stop.
name is William.
William, yep. And he would stop and talk to them as they were sitting on the porch. And so it developed into a friendship, right? And so my father was retired, and so he began to help them, especially Henry, and would take them to their doctor's appointments and to the grocery store. And it's turned into a 22-year friendship between the three of them. Henry passed. And when Henry passed, Snooky was the only one living at the house, and Dad continued to take care of Snooky until Snooky passed a couple of years ago. So when Snooky passed, she gifted the home to my father.
Wow.
And so now he owns it. And we didn't realize really what we had until when she passed and we started going through the house. And we realized, oh my goodness, this is amazing. This is a time capsule.
Right.
Because one, they threw away nothing. So we were finding things dated back to the 1800s that is still in that house. I realized that this was bigger than what we could handle.
Right.
And so I had to call in
Call a friend.
the experts,
Right.
call a friend, right? And that's the beauty of having a state institution right in your backyard. You know, we can assist each other and help each other. Carol and I have worked together on previous projects, along with Molly Godfrey and Mark Salwin from Eastern Mennonite University. But we needed each other because I needed Carol's expertise and her resources to help us preserve this home.
Well, and you mentioned Molly and Mark. They're two other members of the preservation team who were actually going to join us today, but they suddenly couldn't make it. But Molly is in the JMU English department, and she also works in the African American and Diaspora Studies Center, and she knows a great deal about the Green Book, obviously. And then Mark Metzler-Salwin is in the EMU History Department and the Honors Program, so they're part of this team too. So Carol, you got brought into this, and what was it like for you to get into the house and realize, oh my goodness, we have got a gem here?
I have to take a breath because it took my breath away. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. You know, this is one of those treasures that's just hiding in plain sight. And as I walked through it with Dina and her father and began to look around and recognize that not only is this a time capsule, but embedded in every room is a story about Northeast Harrisonburg, about the Black community, about what it means to be in a place for so long and to hold on to a treasure like this, the possibilities that it gives us for telling community history. I was overwhelmed. I was completely overwhelmed. I've never seen anything like it.
What's the preservation team done thus far in the project?
A whole lot.
We've been very fortunate that Mark and Molly have been so involved in this project and have been working in Northeast. We have all been working in Northeast for a while. And I think that we had been looking for an opportunity to open that story up even more than we have already. So often when you hear about Northeast Harrisonburg, my work is with Newtown Cemetery, and there's Northeast Neighborhood Association, but there's Sims School and Lucy Sims, and those are very, very important, but they are telling a particular kind of story. Here we have the story of a middle-class family, a successful Black middle-class family. And so as we started strategizing and thinking about what we needed to do to help Dina and William as they were making decisions about the house, we realized one of the most important things we could do is get it on the National Register. Because getting a property like this on the National Register opens doors to funding and other opportunities that would otherwise be closed. And so that's what we began working on. We worked with the Department of Historic Resources and were able to get support from Virginia Humanities to hire an architectural historian, Dan Pizzoni, and he wrote the National Register nomination. And so that we're now in that process. In June of this year, the house was accepted by the Department of Historic Resources on the Virginia Landmarks Register. And now that recommendation from the state of Virginia has gone to the National Park Service, and we're waiting to hear when it will be placed on the National Register.
Wow, that's huge. Well, you described the importance of the house in telling the story of Harrisonburg's Black community. Mayor Reed, you're a native of Harrisonburg, and you know a lot of people. There's a building on campus named for your aunt.
Yes.
It was recently renamed for Doris Harper Allen.
Yes.
It's a beautiful connection between the university and the community. It's real, and it brings it to the level of significance. Tell us from your perspective as a person who grew up in Harrisonburg, how important this house is in terms of creating a nexus for all the different communities to meet each other.
Well, one, like Carol said, it tells a different story, right? It tells a story of a Black woman who was an entrepreneur, basically. She ran this house, right? This business.
Her husband died, and she ran the boarding house, and this was in the 20s. It's right.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. With her children, right?
Right.
She had a daughter, Mary, who had whose children were Henry and Lois. So they all lived in this home.
And Mary's nickname was Pete.
Pete.
Right.
They all had nicknames,
Right.
cute nicknames.
Right,
Yes,
right.
Pete. And so it was a business, and we found that even their ledgers, right. for keeping up with their finances was immaculate. And so she was teaching, this business onto her daughter, onto her grandchildren. But just to have this history, right, in the neighborhood, not only for us, but for others to come and learn from, is amazing for the city of Harrisonburg. I believe, and Carol, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there was 3 other Green Book properties in Harrisonburg, but they did not survive. This home did, right? And it was also up to urban renewal. And so and Carol can tell you all about urban renewal.
I think that's another episode. It's a big enough story.
Yeah,
But folks need to know that what the urban renewal was during the early 60s. It was a federal program, and it was, quote unquote, designed to eliminate blight. And all over the country, Black neighborhoods were eliminated. And there were 122 families displaced in the Northeast by urban renewal in Harrisonburg. And this Green Book house
survived.
It's right on the edge.
Yes.
It's right on.
Yes.
It's amazing that it survived.
It survived. Yeah, tells you the character of not only the home, but of the family.
Right.
Right. And so I think that's another reason why this is such an incredible story. I tell this quick story about my father, and I tell it to him all the time, so I'm not talking about him behind his
He's
back.
going to hear this.
He's
probably.
going to hear it. Well, maybe not. This is a podcast. I don't even know if he listens to it. But, my father, he tends to embellish, right? And so he would come back and he would tell me and my sister about what Snooky was telling him about the house, Lois. And he was like, yeah, Dina, Snooky said that George Washington Carver stayed there at the house. And I was like, Dad, don't be telling people that. Like, what are you talking about? Well, she said that, Duke Ellington's band stayed at this house. And I was like, Dad, well, they did.
Right. And it's in the records.
They actually did.
Right.
And so that's what I'm saying. Like, we didn't know quite what we had until we walked in there, and then everything just kind of opened up. And Carol's correct. Every time people come in the house, they have to take a breath.
Right.
Because it's the history. It just hits you right in the face, right? And you're gone back to that time. And it's truly a time capsule.
The university recently published a story about the house. So if you're interested in seeing some of the pictures, a lot of great photographs, just search for JMU Green Book House, and it'll come right up. As Dina said, you'll be stunned. It is just as it was in the early 60s. it's a time capsule. Well, in addition to Duke Ellington's band, some of Count Basie's band stayed there.
Yes, some members.
Members, but Washington Carver stayed there, and apparently it was in 1928, and he was here to speak at Madison College.
Yes.
And I think he spoke at Bridgewater also.
Yes, yes. So I believe at that time it was just a boarding house. Right. Yeah, you can go.
Yeah.
That's before it was
before the Green
before
Book.
Green
Yeah,
House.
yeah. And that's one of the things that makes this such an important story. This was already a second generation boarding house for African Americans before the Green Book ever came along.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, when the all is said and done and the house is fully preserved, I think George Washington Carver slept here is something that ought to be on the sign. Right?
Yes, it should be because that was something that they talked a lot about. And we're also able to record some of the audio interviews from. I think Ruth is
Ruth Tolliver, yes, local historian.
who knew Snooky but I'm sorry, I keep calling them by their nicknames, but that's how we knew them
Sure,
in the
right.
neighborhood, and could tell those stories of how Henry and Lois would talk about the visitors that stayed there. 5-bedroom house with one bathroom, but it was full of love, and you can tell that.
And the story that it tells, as we were talking about before, of a rich middle class black neighborhood, which not a lot of people hear those kind of stories in small towns. Usually, when we talk about black history, it's always big city kind of stuff, and so it's really different in a small town how the black history has unfolded, especially in a place like in Western Virginia where we are here in Harrisonburg.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and I can't I can't say it enough about the partnership that we have, meaning the Black community has with JMU and EMU, right? Because we cannot tell these stories without the resources of JMU and EMU. And so to have professors like Carol, like Mark and Molly, to want to give their time, because that's what they're doing, they're giving their time and their expertise to us so that we're able to tell our ancestors' stories is so valuable. And so I tell them all the time, we can't do this without you. There's no way we could do this without you. And they're just so giving to want to help. And so that's a great partnership that we have with the Northeast neighborhood, the Black community, and our universities.
I first heard about the Green Book House in my role as board member of Harrisonburg Downtown Renaissance. And after your dad, William, got the house and you started to go about trying to figure out how do I get some compatriots here to tell this story, you came to the board of Harrisonburg Downtown Renaissance. And I remember looking around the room and everybody was just absolutely gobsmacked. I mean, we were so excited about the prospect of this property becoming known for what it is. And even its physical location on Mason Street, north of JMU campus and south of the EMU campus, and right in the heart of the Northeast neighborhood, it's symbolically creates a nexus point for us to be able to tell this story.
Yeah, absolutely.
It exists on the last remaining spur of original Mason Street.
Right.
And so when you drive by it or when you look at it from the Friendly City Food Co-op from that parking lot, most folks don't recognize what it really means. They don't recognize what it represents in terms of its location. But it is preserving access in and out of the old access in and out of that neighborhood into the downtown. And that's something that carries forward today because this is a question that has now arisen. How do we bring the Northeast neighborhood and downtown back together again? And so we have a commission that is working on that particular issue. And here at that moment, this house emerges with its story and it's the linchpin. But I will also say that had we tried to place this house on the National Register 15 or 20 years ago, it wouldn't have gone. but the way that we think about significance and the way we think about what's important in communities has evolved. And so there are 4 criteria by which a property can go on the National Register. Somebody important lived there, something important happened there, there's important scientific information, or it represents a broad theme of American history. And that's how the Ida Francis House is going on the National Register. It represents a broad theme in American history, and that is the theme of community survival. And the Green Book is really, you might say it's the icing on the cake, or it's what gets people interested in it, but at the same time, the story is so much deeper. And just to recognize that there are things about that house that make it nationally significant, not just locally significant, but nationally significant. It gives you pause. It's very humbling.
I really am very interested in the concept of the idea of significance changing over time. How has significance changed in recent years, Carol, when in thinking in context of why this matters?
Well, when the National Register was first established in the mid-1960s, the focus was really on saving and preserving high-end places, so the Monticellos of the world, the Mount Vernons of the world. And American history was seen as a history of great people at that time, or great architecture. Those were the things the structures that were placed on the National Register. Very few archaeological sites made it on the National Register in the early days. It was a lot of above-ground stuff associated with important people and important things. And I think that as America has changed, and we have had very, very meaningful dialogues about what has happened to African American communities, and how did that history get lost? How has that history been silenced? I think that the keepers of the National Register began to realize that those stories are just as important. Those stories hold up the foundation of the United States. And this is definitely a working class family. This is a family that has really held on and survived and did very well for themselves, and are caught in or participated in this slipstream of history that we know as the Green Book. And yet what they were doing all along was so very important.
Wow. From your perspective, Mayor Reed, in this time, now that significance has changed, what do you see, especially as the mayor of Harrisonburg, our first Black female mayor of Harrisonburg, how do you see this as an opportunity to heal the Northeast neighborhood after urban renewal, bring together people who have not been formally together?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question. I think it's another opportunity to just tell our story, right? And so in order for us to heal, we got to know each other, right? And we have to acknowledge those harms, but we also have to know each other's history. And so this is another opportunity for us to tell the story. I think, Carol is right. We're there's an opportunity that we're in now. It's a connector program where we're trying to connect the Northeast neighborhood, the community with downtown.
Right.
And that's something that HDR has been, Andrea has been very,
We're pushing north. Pushing north.
That's her thing. And we are. And so I definitely appreciate it. She walks her dog around that house all the time. And so she knew about that house. And so when I came to you, she was so excited about it. And so
Mayor Reed is referring to Andrea Dono,
Yes.
who's the executive director
Yes.
of Harrisonburg Downtown
Yes.
Renaissance.
And so what gets me excited, and which I think is beautiful about Harrisonburg, is to see white people excited about our history and want to be a part of it and want to learn more. And that's who we are as Harrisonburg. And so, because we're so diverse. It's not just when I was growing up here, it was white people and very little Black people here in Harrisonburg. And we were kind of in our own, communities. Now we're so diverse in Harrisonburg. We need to understand and learn each other's stories. And so this is a part of that.
The diversity in Harrisonburg is another very interesting story. There are as many languages spoken in Harrisonburg City schools as there are in Arlington, which is phenomenal. What do you think the Green Book House, the Francis House, could be as an opportunity in terms of bringing all these different communities together that might not necessarily intersect.
Yeah, so, and I want to tell you, I just got the number because school just started, 77, well over almost 77 different languages spoken in our school.
Well, that's way more than Arlington City.
Public school system. It's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal number. Snooki, the one thing Snooki wanted, she wanted that house to be able to tell the story, and she wanted people to learn about the story, about the house. And so it was in her will, and meaning her passion and for us to take care of the house, preserve the house. But she also wanted young people to learn from the house. So I'm hoping that this is going to be an opportunity. We've quietly done tours where we brought some students in the house because, I brought a group of EMU students over the summer, and they didn't have any idea what they kind of knew about the Green Book, maybe the movie. They kind of heard about the movie, but they really didn't understand, what the Green Book was or what it did.
Or why it was even necessary.
Why it was even necessary. And Mark did a beautiful job with telling the story. And then once they walked in it, again, it took their breath. They understood the history that they were learning about. And that's what I hope happens. We have high school students, elementary, middle school students, a great public school system. We have 2 universities. We have a county that surrounds us. I hope that we bring as many young people into that house to learn the history and to learn about the Francis family.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and there's probably still more to discuss. So we'll have you back. Especially after it gets listed on the National Register. And for those of you listening to Being the Change, if you'd like to go see some of those pictures and read the whole story, just search for JMU Green Book and you'll find it. It's on the homepage. And also, don't forget that if you've got ideas for other episodes of Being the Change, send us your thoughts to beingthechange@jmu.edu. Until then, thank you, Mayor Reed. Thank you, Dr. Nash. This has been a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Listeners of Being the Change will be delighted to hear that since the recording of this episode, the Francis House has been successfully added to the National Register of Historic Places administered by the U.S. National Park Service.
Thanks for listening. Tune in next time to hear another story of how members of the James Madison University community are being the change. Dive deeper and consume countless other stories at jmu.edu/Madison Magazine. Go Dukes!
The Being the Change podcast was conceived by Jim Heffernan, editor of Madison Magazine, and me, Andy Perrine, head of JMU Marketing. Thanks to Jenna Polk and the team at Rose Library Studios, where the show is recorded by Steve Adderton, the guy who also captures those amazing campus drone shots you see on Instagram. Original music and episode production by Neil Perrine. All of us involved in creating Being the Change are JMU alumni, and we bleed purple. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.